He's like licking her tears away and I'm like, oh my god, am I into that? I finally caved and read the series A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. This series is something that 15-year-old Julie would have shit herself reading and reviewing on her book blog. I decided to get back into reading again, honestly, because I felt way too plugged into social media. Obviously, I'm on YouTube and also I started a TikTok. Shameless plug. Go check it out. But I felt like I was too much into it, and reading has a way of offering up escapism, and I started with a bang with an entire new series. I got through the series pretty quickly, not because I was like particularly enthralled by it, but because I really wanted to watch with Cindy's reviews of them without being spoiled. I mean, who can resist those thumbnails? Couldn't be me. I noticed that this series was very polarizing, with reviewers like Cindy who found major problems with the story and others who were ride or die with the series. The fan base is also extremely large. They're also going to be starting a show on Hulu. Currently, there are 4 novels published along with a novella, but since they are longer than my college textbook, I'm not kidding about that. Here's my World Religions textbook. Here is the last book in ACOTAR. This girl is 700 pages thick. My brain is melting. I am just going to cover one book in this series, A Court of Thorns and Roses, the first book. I thought I would combine my thoughts on all the books into one video, but I realized while I was scripting that I had way more to rant about than I thought. And to save my computer the trouble of rendering a massive file like that, I'm going to create different videos with different installments for each of the books in the series. So without further ado, never have I ever read A Court of Thorns and Roses. So I bought this copy way back in 2015. You might notice that this cover looks extremely not similar to the rest of the series. I bought this many years ago and my sister found it in the back of my bookshelf untouched. I just never got around to reading it, which is why the cover art is so different. I prefer this a lot better. I don't know about you guys, but I really don't like when they include like human forms or human models on the cover. I just think it's kind of lazy and it tells me nothing about the story, but that's why these two don't really match. In case you do not know what this series is about, let's take a look at the inside cover summary, shall we? When 19-year-old Huntress Feyre, okay, we're 6 words in and I'm already annoyed. Her name is Feyre and this world is full of fairies. Sarah, why you gotta make it so hard on me? Feyre kills the wolf in the woods. A beast-like creature arrives to demand retribution. Dragged to a treacherous magical land she knows only about from legends, Feyre discovers that her captor is not an animal, but Tamlin, one of the lethal immortal fairies who once ruled their world. So this is where the comparison comes into Beauty and the Beast. Feyre basically gets dragged back to Tamlin's palace, or his court as they call it, realizes that he was cursed to have this like mask stuck to his face and his powers kind of drained. And this is the same for everybody in his court, which is called the Spring Court. As Feyre dwells on his estate, her feelings for Tamlin transform it from icy hostility to a fiery passion. It's like lukewarm at best. That burns through every lie and warning she's been told about the beautiful, dangerous world of the Fae. But an ancient wicked shadow over the fairylands is growing, and Feyre must find out a way to stop it, or doom Tamlin and his world forever. Oh my god, can you imagine if she just went with the latter? Like, y'all, like, I'm just gonna doom you. Oh my god, I would actually, can someone write that? Like, actually though, I would love if somebody wrote that, like, they were going to save the place, but then they realized it was too much work, so they doomed everybody, and you realize at the end that you're actually reading the villain's perspective and not the heroine. I'm too lazy to write it to myself. Like, I'm self-aware. I know I'm too lazy to write that. Can someone write that? Okay, so now we're gonna get into spoiler territory. So if you don't want to be spoiled, exit the chat now. In order to explain my rating, there's a couple different categories that I have to talk about in order to tell you my overall thoughts of the book. So number 1 is the writing style. Sarah J. Maas is extremely detailed and descriptive when it comes to her stories, which normally would be a positive thing, but in this case, it edges on superfluous. And I realized this within the first chapter of the book, which is only 8 pages. But it was enough for me to recognize that this was like too much. The forest had become a labyrinth of snow and ice. Okay, it's snowing, got it. The gusting wind blew thick flurries to sweep away my tracks, but buried along with them any signs of potential quarry. Okay, it's snowing hard. I get it. It's falling. The icy snow crunched under my fraying boots, and I ground my teeth. Low visibility, unnecessary noise. I was well on my way to yet another fruitless hunt. Cool. It's almost like it's snowing. The snow fell and fell, dancing and curling like sparkling spindrifts. The white flesh and you might be thinking, you know what? Maybe the snow has something to do with the plot. Maybe Feyre isn't like Belle. She's on some Elsa shit. And this has something to do with the story. And you would be dead ass wrong. This has nothing to do with what's coming. What you have to take away from this first chapter is that she killed a wolf. That wolf is actually a fairy, and that's the reason Tamlin is seeking retribution. That's it. The snow wasn't necessary to the story, and yet she spent half the chapter describing it. And that's my main problem with Sarah J. Maas's writing. The next category is world building. I haven't read a high fantasy book in quite a long time, but I did really like the nuances in this book between the human realm and the fairy realm. They're divided by a wall. This is basically a consequence of a war that happened 500 years ago because fairies tried to enslave humankind, and because there was this huge revolution or rebellion, whatever you want to call it, they created a treaty which separated the two realms so that there would be less interaction. You get the nuances and the ripple effect of this war. You have fairy attitudes. Some of them are conflicted. Some of them still want humans as slaves. Other ones find it repulsive, and because fairies don't age and they remember fighting in the war. So there are still people who remember that time and have different attitudes about it. On the human side, you have some humans who really devoted to the fairies still. They're called the Children of the Blessed. They're basically looked down upon by the rest of the human society. The rest of the humans mostly look for trinkets, they believe that iron will keep fairies away. They do anything that they can to kind of avoid the wall. So there are very different nuances between each of those cultures, and I think that that's what made it so convincing that this was an entirely different world. And this is where I feel like Sarah J. Maas's writing actually worked in her favor, because yeah, it was too detailed, but I don't need that much description to understand what snow is. You know what I mean? I could fill in the blanks for myself. When I read, I fill in an image in my head of what I'm picturing based on what you tell me. I don't need 5 sentences to describe snow. What I do need 5 sentences about is this world. The towns they live in, the thoughts, the culture, the ideology. And I think that's one aspect that, at least to me, worked in her favor, that this was 100% believable. I bought into it. The third category is characterization and potentially character development. I'm such a sucker for character development. I love it. The main character is Feyre. She is the sole provider for her family. She has 2 sisters and a father. Despite being the youngest child, she hunts and makes money for her entire family. My little brother could never. The oldest sister, Nesta, is described as a bitch, but in nicer words. And the younger sister, Elaine, who's the middle child, is a delicate flower of a human being. And even though Feyre is providing for them, they're not all that particularly nice to her, which doesn't make sense to me. The most beloved person is Elaine, and I think that's because she's just very delicate, wholesome, and they can't help but love her. Her personality starts to come out a lot more when Tamlin brings her to the fairy realm. Basically, when Feyre killed the wolf, she had to give her life to Tamlin in place of the wolf she killed. But rather than making her an indentured servant or something, Tamlin is you can do whatever you want, just stay out of my way, you just have to stay here. My question is, why don't more humans violate this treaty? Feyre is out here living the dream, okay? She gets all her needs taken care of. She's living in disgusting wealth. She has all this food that she's never seen before, and she doesn't have to work a day in her life. Goals, okay? However, Feyre doesn't see it that way, and it's really hard for her to buy into the fact that Tamlin doesn't have some nefarious purpose of keeping her there. She keeps trying to collect knives and weapons and booby-trapping her room at night. You start to understand that Feyre has issues making rational decisions, even though she had to take care of her family for her whole life and therefore had to make all these decisions. Don't know how her family survived this long. This was illustrated really well in one particular scene. Tamlin said, "Stay in your room," but a wild, wicked voice weaving in between the drum beats whispered otherwise. "Go," that voice said, tugging at me. "Go see." By 10 o'clock, I could no longer stand it. I followed the drums. Like an idiot. She gave in at 10 p.m. Feyre, the clubs aren't even open at 10 p.m. What you doing? However, over time, she slowly adjusts, especially when Tamlin promises that her family is going to be taken care of. They actually were restored to an even greater wealth than they had before. And he promises that he spelled them. So to them, she's completely safe with a family relative, and they have nothing to worry about. So Feyre starts exploring her new home, and obviously I am waiting for the inevitable. I'm waiting for Tamlin to seduce Feyre with his monstrous, luxurious, giant library. Unfortunately, we actually find out that Feyre is illiterate. She's not interested in reading. Her thing is painting, because she can't be like those other Belles. She's got to be different, okay? So she's into painting. It's not like there's any other Disney princess that was locked away in a magical tower and used painting as a solace. Anyway, Tamlin seduces her with his giant art gallery instead, and she starts to embrace her new life in Fairyland. Tamlin is the other main character. Nothing about him suggests a personality. Everything we know about him was done to him. 50 years ago, he went to a ball and he was cursed to have that mask stuck to his face. The same curse drained his magical abilities to minimal magical powers. He's got daddy issues like any other male fictional character. And even in the end, when him and Feyre are in the clutches of the evil villain, he just decides to play dead like a possum. That's his grand plan. Let me just dig my head in the sand and maybe everything will be okay. Another character we see a lot in the Spring Court is Lucien. He is Tamlin's right-hand man. He has more of a spark than Tamlin. He's sarcastic. He gives Feyre a little shit because he's bitter that Feyre killed their friend, and for some reason Feyre doesn't care about that, and neither does Tamlin. In the end, him and Feyre become reluctant friends. They become kind of allies. But still, there was nothing really about him that I particularly liked. I didn't really think twice about his character. I just wish he did more. Kind of like Tamlin, he was just pretty passive, even though he had a better personality than Tamlin. The character that seemed the most promising to me was Rhysand. And, his introductory line, according to Feyre, was, "I stepped out of the shelter of my savior's arm and turned to thank him. Standing before me was the most beautiful man I'd ever seen." Just for comparison, let's see Tamlin's introductory line, according to Feyre. "I stifled a cry and pushed myself against the paneled wall beside the door, feeling for the molding of the threshold, trying to gauge the distance between me and escape." So yeah, there's that. You can see where this is going. Rhysand is painted in a lot of different lights. First, he's the guy who saved Feyre when she was in danger. Then he's painted as this terrible High Lord of the Night Court who killed Tamlin's father. I'm such a sucker for people who are painted in that morally gray light. I was really rooting for his redemption arc. He also so happens to be the only person in this book with more than 2 brain cells, so I'm really excited to see more of him in book 2. Now let's talk about the most important part for me, romance, okay? I am a simple book hoe. As long as there is romance where one of the partners is kind of witty and they're only mildly toxic, I will ship them, okay? My favorite OTP is Delena. I overlook a lot. However, the romance in this book really did not intrigue me. It felt very much like a relationship of convenience and opportunity. Feyre, for the first time in her life, had all of her needs taken care of. It kind of felt like Hot Girl Summer with a lukewarm man. Tamlin was just kind of there. And honestly, even at one point, Feyre was like, "Hey, why are you into me?" And this is what Tamlin said. "Because your human joy fascinates me. The way you experience things in your lifespan so wildly and deeply and all at once is entrancing. I'm drawn to it, even when I know I shouldn't be, even when I try not to be." So he loves how human she is. Does someone want to tell him how this book ends? Funny enough, I learned a new sex trope from this book. Tamlin has to be filled with like Tinkerbell dust or something for this ritual. And basically it lowers his inhibitions and he starts hooking up with Feyre one night against the wall. I learned from With Cindy that that is called a sex pollen trope. Didn't know that was a thing. Y'all are nasty. Almost as nasty as some of the descriptions of Feyre and Tamlin being together. He pulled me onto his lap, holding me tightly against him as his lips parted mine. I became aware of every pore in my body when his tongue entered my mouth. What? So I'm not into this couple at all. Also, I knew they weren't going to last when I read this one scene. I'm so sorry, I cannot remember the page number. But basically, there was something scary happening, whatever. Feyre's like, I'm really worried. And Tamlin's like, oh honey, why don't you just paint? Thank God we have Rhysand out here being a raging feminist. The last thing I want to discuss is the plot. And you might be thinking, hey, isn't that the most important part? Well, not in this book it isn't, because it starts on page 285. This is a 400-page book, by the way. This is when we meet the main villain of the story, Amarantha, who cursed everyone in Prythian. She's the one who cursed Tamlin and his spring court at the ball to have those masks stuck to his face and to drain their magical powers. This woman is the amalgam of every Disney villain ever. She even has a ring on her finger with an eyeball on it. I'm pretty sure I could order that at Party City, like right now. We finally find out the extent of the curse and how it can be broken. Yes, it just has to be a girl who's in love with Tamlin. Oh, wait, she also has to say verbally, I love you. Oh, and also there's a time frame. It's gotta happen within 50 years. Oh, also right, she has to hate fairies right before that happens. But not just hate them, she has to hate them enough to kill one. Oh, and the fairy she kills has to be specifically from the spring court. It can't be any other court because for some reason that matters. Oh, and you're also not allowed to speak anything about it because, you know, you'll jinx it. So, you know. TSA doesn't even require that much of me when I'm getting on a moving airplane. The 15-part curse isn't even the weirdest thing about Amarantha. The weirdest thing is that she designs these trials for Feyre to complete in order to save literally everyone. I just don't understand Amarantha's motivation. Like, her history is that she fought for the enslavement of humankind. So she's staring at Feyre thinking she's less than a person, and yet she's giving her 1 billion ounce. Oh, and just in case the trials are too hard, she's also giving her a riddle. And if at any time she solves the riddle, it's an automatic win for humanity. Everyone is safe. And the riddle goes like this. There are those who seek me a lifetime, but never we meet. And those I kiss, but who trample me beneath ungrateful feet. At times I seem to favor the clever and the fair, but I bless all those who are brave enough to dare. By large the ministrations are soft-handed and sweet, but scorned I become a difficult beast to defeat. For though each of my strikes lends a powerful blow, when I kill I do it slow. Oh, I got it. This fat I'm sorry if I retch as I say the answer, but it's love. L-O-V-E. I'm not trolling you, okay? If you haven't read the book and you think I'm joking right now, I'm not. So for all those reasons, but especially Amarantha, I rated this book 3 stars. And to me, 3 stars translates to like meh. It wasn't hugely offensive to me, but it didn't make me interested in any way. Now normally, if I were to read a book and give it 3 stars, I wouldn't bother with the rest of the series. This is usually when I call it quits. But a couple things gave me hope. Number 1 is that Feyre, because she saved everyone and she almost died, the High Lords each gave her like a spark of themselves and turned her into a High Fae essentially, thereby destroying everything that Tamlin found interesting about her. And that to me sounds promising. The next part is that Rhysand and Feyre formed a connection under the mountain. He's like licking her tears away and I'm like, oh my god, am I into that? At the end, they have this kind of like moment. Rhys kind of freezes and then stumbles, and it's very obvious to me that he just realized that Feyre was his mate, because in this world, mates exist. That was another thing that kind of bothered me. They're mates, and you're gonna make the main couple a mate, a mating pair. But every mate we've heard of in this book is like toxic as heck. and they aren't good partners either. So I'm not really sure how romantic that is, but anyway, they're mates, which is surefire way for tension and angst, and I love that. So those are my thoughts on the first book, Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Also, just to be very transparent, I have read books 1 through 3 in the series, as well as the novella A Court of Frost and Starlight. I'm about to start A Court of Silver Flames, and I'm super excited because I heard it was really spicy. But please mind your spoilers in the comments. I have not read it yet. Be on the lookout for part 2, where I will review A Court of Mist and Fury. Just to give you a heads up, guys, this book completely changed my opinion of the series. I know. Please don't look at me like that. I will explain, like, as detailed as the snow in the forest, I will explain why I like this book so much and why it changed my opinion of the series. Be on the lookout for that video. I love you guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.